Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special crisis segment of World MUN Day, Return to the Moon. My name is Daniel Gindis. Together with me are the crisis team who ran the TLVMUN crisis last summer in 2021. And it was the first in-person crisis and possibly in-person conference in a long time with all of the COVID lockdowns. So it was quite a process and quite a story, and I'm very happy to have the full crisis team with me: Roi Nachlieli, Roi Weisman, and Niv Yanir. And we have Johnny, the Secretary General, who contacted us and said, we want to have a cool crisis. So what we're going to go through here is talk about, I think, the different processes that go into creating a joint cabinet crisis, how ours went, the considerations we had as a team, observations, and fun stuff like that. So the first, I think, guiding question, and I was crisis director, and the four of us went through quite a journey between even coming up with the idea and in the end, which was definitely one of the best crises I was ever part of, like story-wise, character-wise, and given the, the level of attention and everything else needed to happen. It was a really amazing journey that I think we can feel we can recount. Does anyone want to say anything before we get started? Maybe.
Fine.
Awesome.
I don't know which order you talk about.
Okay, so in the beginning, the first question of what inspired the idea, and this was a process that like I was taking point on together with Johnny, and eventually Roi and Roi both joined, and then you joined us after. And in the process of the idea, I can say, at least from my end, I felt that some of the earlier pitches just were missing something. They didn't have that like spark of something like unique. Johnny, can you tell us a little bit about your perspective of, I guess, guiding the crisis topic until it was chosen and everything?
Yes. Well, I think
you have to speak louder.
Okay, thank you. What you just mentioned about the initial lack of spark, I think that comes from like the situation of choosing a topic is always like, okay, what have I seen before? And then you're trying to create something that resembles it, but it must be original. So you start from a point which is thinking about other stuff, and then you're saying, oh, this was already done, this is not so interesting, etc. And it really took a while for you and your team to throw some ideas out and just see what's good.
Roi, as you were here from the beginning of the different processes, how was that for you?
Well, I joined with no previous knowledge of crisis. This was my first year in MUN in general. Like, we didn't even have a lesson about crisis. I didn't even know what the cabinets were, and I suddenly find myself in this meeting where they speak about different topics and what this character will be and what this cabinet will be. So I kind of try to get a footing in the first half of it. After I sort of understood, it was like I believe many ideas were interesting, and I still think many ideas we came up with could be explored in the future, Korean crisis, for example, where Kim Jong-un dies and there is a succession crisis that could be fun with the nukes. So I think we came up with many great ideas. Even though it took a while before we came up with the perfect idea, what fitted for us, I see it as a good process, because you come up with many ideas that can be used in the future. So that was great to be. It was a great trial by fire for crisis, at least for me. I really enjoyed it.
Roi, you want to add some thoughts?
Yeah, so I think what distinguishes the crisis that we ended up landing on, which was, the race to the moon in the 60s, was the setting that it takes place in. Because the problem with people normally choosing a crisis committee is that they want a cool topic and they have a storyline in mind, and they say, oh, well, we think the storyline can be pretty cool. But the thing is, if you're backrooming you want the delegates to have some sort of control over the creative process, which means that they should be able to take it in many avenues that you didn't foresee. And I think what made this crisis really not only potentially great, but in the end actually great, was the fact that it was done in the 1960s with so many things going on around it. So now you have the Cold War, right, between the two sides, and you have technological advances, and you have all of these amazing political possibilities that go around with it. So it's not just a science-based crisis, who gets to the moon first, and it's definitely not just a sci-fi crisis, but a political crisis, which I think is the heart of every good crisis. So the idea was good because it enabled delegates to take it in many unforeseen paths, and that was, I think, the immediate spark to it.
I definitely think those are very valid points in the journey of, there were two big questions. One is, what is the topic going to be? And I kept telling Johnny, he's like, we want to advertise the topic. I'm like, we don't know it yet. When we know, you'll know. And then when we knew, we knew. And then there was the second challenge, which was the question of staffing, because within lockdown, suddenly people can't come, and that, we'll talk about that when we get into the process and how all of a sudden you find your staff cut down to a quarter. The one thing I want to also talk about in the preparation process is the cabinet choice, because for us, we had a series of ideas, and then somehow in one of our staff discussions with some of the international team, who in the end didn't end up coming, the idea of the moon just came up, and like when we all heard it, we're all like, that's the idea. It really is sort of like magic. Like, we know there's going to be magic, we're not sure where, and then like, oh, like for this year, this is what works. But after that, we had to make the decision of cabinet choices, and we also, because we didn't know how many delegates were coming, would it be 2 cabinets? Would it be 4? Initially, it was we planned for 4 that then became 2. And I want to talk a little bit about the process of, like, if you have, let's say, 2 cabinets of different sides or 4, what types of cabinets and characters you want and the considerations that you have. So anyone like to start?
Sure, I can start. From my limited experience, I'll say that, because this conference is my main experience with Crisis, this process we had. I think when you're looking at characters and cabinets, you really need this. It's a thing you must like play with, and it's a thing you must really consider, because it really depends on the condition of the crisis and what you want to represent. The clash must be represented in the cabinets and in the sides. So when it's a Cold War, it's pretty simple, right? You know what cabinets you're going to have. If you want to go on something more obscure, you can maybe play around with it, and even in the Cold War, you can choose it to be strictly scientific or militaristic. It really depends on what you want to achieve and where you want to take your delegates. It's one of the ways, I think, where a crisis staff can sort of influence the way the crisis will go, obviously by giving them the characters, what they can do. But you still keep the creativity that comes with the crisis, because you have the characters, but you can take them whenever you want. You can be a secretary of foreign affairs that's really aggressive, or really seeks peace a lot, So it really depends. But the characters and the cabinets are just great tools we can use, and I think we use them well in our crisis.
And also, there's another aspect to it, which is not just the storyline, which is like the ideal reason for like choosing the number of cabinets. There's also the logistical issues. How many classes do you have? How much staff do you have? Most importantly, as you've explained it to me, Daniel, and that's very important, because if you base everything on your storyline and it's completely disconnected from the reality of your logistical abilities, then it's gonna fail.
I think actually in that classroom aspect, that you were able to get classrooms right next to each other. So the back room, usually on the same floor. So if the back room need to go and be a character, do something, they could just walk down the hall.
In some conferences, the classrooms are in the other side of campus.
We've had there was one crisis in Oxford a number of years ago the suffragette movement. One of the cabinets was in a different building, and their whole story was very disconnected from the rest of it. And in the end, we sort of found that things were happening that we weren't even completely aware of in the front room just because of the physical distance. So the logistics support from the Secretariat is of essential importance. Roy, you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I want to touch on the non-logistical points, but on, I think, what makes Crisis MUN. So at the end of the day, character choice is important because in a crisis room, just like in every MUN room, you as a delegate are judged based off of how much influence you have at the end of the day, which means that in choosing characters, we need to be very, very aware of the possibilities of that character to achieve some sort of independence and definitely some sort of influence over other characters. And first and foremost, it's over other characters in their own cabinet, which means I think the biggest misconception in Crisis is that cabinets work against each other. So you have the Soviet room and they work against the American room. While that is true on the surface level, on a deeper level, delegates work against the delegates within their own cabinets because that's where the struggle is. So in choosing characters, it doesn't really matter if you have two cabinets that are not on the same level, as in one cabinet is definitely stronger than the other, because backroom can take care of that and can limit sort of the consequences of the actions of the stronger cabinet. But you need a very good balance of the characters within the room, which means that two characters shouldn't probably have the same capabilities, because then no one, or at least not one of them, can really shine. And if you do have the situation, be aware of it, because then the struggle becomes which one of them assumes more power. So you really want to build something that can A, enable the delegates to take it wherever they want, and B, you want to know what is going on so that you can monitor what delegates are doing and judge them through that.
That's a very good point of like that type of measurement. And also I'd like bring it into specifics. One of the considerations we had when we knew it was a Cold War scenario was, on the one hand, there is the Cold War, general interest, the larger picture. And if you're going to have, and this is actually one of the challenges in general of, I'd say, asymmetrical crisis, is that the Cold War, you do have the USA and the USSR, so they actually are balanced, at least theoretically, in capabilities. But if, let's say, you do the Russian war in Afghanistan, there's really one significantly more powerful body than the other, even with the financial crisis Soviet Union had in the 80s. And the second one is when a committee is so powerful, and we really, like, you have, as a crisis director, either really limit their power or you have to follow them where their power would take them. So the president of the US and the US foreign minister and defense minister, they can do whatever they want in the entire world in the 60s. So we have to give enough things to keep them busy. So that's why when we built the Crisis, we put a few starting points of things like the moon race was one of the issues, but we had 2 or 3 others, including potential elections and some challenges in the Soviet cabinet, so that like they could really be like, you don't have to go to the moon. You can, and we had half the committee, which were scientists for that purpose. There was a science half and the government half. But when we structured it like that, the idea that we had was that it's our job as the back room and the scientist's job to make themselves relevant. But it didn't have to go that way. And we didn't limit the powers of the committee. It just, everything became so intertwined, that's actually where they went. And that brings us to one more point I'd like to make before we start getting into the crisis prep itself and the Kennedy-Khrushchev dynamic. Was the insistence on our side that we wanted to use scientists, because Kennedy would never be able to sit in the Soviet cabinet. Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense, their characters in no way in the world, like maybe on the highest level of defections, could one of them go as their character to the other one. But scientists could move. And this is one thing is when you discuss with crises and overpower, and this is one of the things I think that's really important, is you have these lower ranking individuals who aren't heads of state who could feasibly move sides, because otherwise you're into a war game. It becomes very much tactical, troop movements, maps, maybe a diplomatic summit, but you're missing the element. I think what added a lot of richness is that scientists and other characters could actually continue their stories in different cabinets, and one character went from one cabinet to the other to the moon and then wasn't in any cabinet until he got arrested. So that there's definitely a place around something to consider when you have like powering and overpowering. So in the end, we basically merged our 4 cabinets of 2 governmental, 2 scientific, with the intention of the scientific committee becoming enough of a important objective, which was their goal. Their whole like study guide was structured. You need to get the government to notice you and make this moon thing a priority. They're going to be busy with other things. And then we merged them into a committee, which was really half government, half science, which is where with varying levels of MUN delegates. So I feel at this point, anything else in like prep before the crisis start that we should say before we get into the crisis itself?
I just want to know that I was pleasantly surprised. Like I feel like as now as you build your own crisis, you can never be. It almost feels like you can't be prepared enough. Like I felt like for the result we got, we didn't prepare enough. It was almost surprising to me the result we got. So I think if we even did more in the groundwork, we could have even gotten to further lengths and to greater results. But it was very impressive to me as a first crisis what we managed to achieve with the amount of preparation we did.
And the very little time that we had because of all the changes that the government imposed on us, and suddenly you didn't have your staff, everything had to be replanned. It was very tough times, and somehow
There were quick, good decisions, and we got to do it correctly and in the right way.
Well, it's like it was like 3 days before the study guides were due, and everyone writes study guides last minute a lot of the time. I feel that had we made the deadlines a month earlier, it would have been quite different because we had some good research. Like the international team brought some really great lists of scientists and government officials and good considerations from that time period. And 3 days before the guides are due, none of you go to the conference. Crisis, surprise. And then all of us had to write everything. We got a few pieces, but with that type of incentive, it was just harder to get through. So there was a crisis in preparing for crisis. I will say though, before we jump into the story, that like for me, when you plan a crisis, you should always have a plan, but be ready to throw it out the window because the delegates will offer something very, very different, like putting a cow into space to sell space milk. Like we would not have. I would not have thought of that.
So can I say something about that before we jump in?
Yes.
So I think one of the bigger misconceptions about crisis is that Backroom should come with a plan. Because at the end of the day, Backroom usually says, okay, so we need to have some sort of a plan or delegates won't have fun. And then they kind of get into that tunnel mode. They only see things from their perspective. But crisis staff should always look at it from the delegates' perspective. And the delegates read the study guide and come up with their own plans, which means that if crisis comes pre-prepared with a plan and wants to stick with it, it really harms what the delegates can do. And it just becomes a game of, did I guess what Backroom wants me to do? Yes or no? And I don't think that's the kind of experience we want to give delegates.
Absolutely.
And speaking of the experience, I think the biggest logistical hit that was this conference was the fact that we ended up doing it in person and not doing it online. I mean, I think I saw it the most clearly when we did our training session in which we took up Afghanistan. It was right before Biden decided that the US is leaving Afghanistan. It was unbelievably prophetic. And it was terrible. I mean, the storyline was great, but it was terrible because nothing was working. Because at the end of the day, in order for you to really be able to do crisis, you need a team cohesion, which means that Backroom needs to be in the same place, and just being together on Zoom isn't the same thing at all. And the second thing, which is probably more important, and we'll get into details once we get kind of into the storyline, is cohesion inside the room. So not regular MUN, we'll hear speeches and everything, and it's also not the opposite of that. It's not everyone's working on their own personal directives and there's no cohesion going on. you need that cabinet feeling. You need the feeling of working together, and you can't get that in an online format. So I think it was just unbelievable that it happened in person. And I think it's probably one of the most important things to take into consideration when preparing for a crisis.
So I'll say I definitely agree with Roy that the hybrid model can have its challenges. I have seen some pretty good crises work online, but everyone was online. Everyone was on Zoom. Everyone was doing it. But to have some in person and some online leaves a very big disconnect to those online, which is what we experienced when we tried to do it. That's, by the way, why one thing from the conference that really stood out as a conference attending to have an online experience and an in-person experience and a mixed cabinet, which had its challenges, was a secretariat who were so on top of, there's nothing to do with the crisis, just saying that, like, making sure that the online participants have a good time. And this meant missing in-person socials. It meant running an online cooking workshop. I don't know, Johnny, you can tell us all the different things you did, but to make them feel part of it, I've never seen such an effort for something which could have been, hey, we're just doing it in person, bye, you know, so you could talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Basically, a lot of people in Europe were super enthusiastic about coming here, but then there were restrictions and we didn't know what to do. And online seemed like a huge disappointment for many of us, including Crisis, but also the Tel Aviv Society. Everyone who wanted to experience the live conference. So basically we decided to do the hybrid option, which is for a secretariat, it's like the worst thing ever, because it's like actually running two conferences at the same time and trying to make sure that something connects. And I think that's even more important than the online events. I think that the press conference, the press committee did an amazing job working with Crisis, bringing the stuff that was happening live to the people abroad, connecting people to the storyline, and it really helped. And I could tell later by talking to the international people from the online part that it was great for them to hear. It was funny, it was unexpected, just like it was for the rest of us. And in some ways we were all part of one bigger thing going on.
Definitely felt like that. So yeah, commended you guys. There was a cooking workshop and other stuff. Really, really great. All right, so sort of circle back to what Roy was saying about crises. I very much agree. I don't think that as a crisis director you should ever impose your ideas on the delegates. I will say I do feel that it's good to have a plan, which I can tell you every single crisis I've had we threw out the window, but at least we as the crisis team, we weren't waiting for the delegates to give us ideas. We were going somewhere. But when they give us a better idea, we went there, and they always did. But for this, I feel that as the crisis background, though, you should have at least some sort of progression that is happening, and because some kind of conflict, whether it's a workers' strike or something else, which they do need to deal with, or it will get worse, and that gets them to move in some kind of a direction. But at the end of the day, it's just so that there is some level of momentum. You don't know how good your delegates are going to be, especially if they're new to crisis. In the earlier phases, they need to see what's happening. So one thing we've used at some previous conferences I've been in was called a consolidation crisis, a scenario that each cabinet has to deal with on its own, to sort of which has nothing to do with the other one. And if they deal with it, that's how they get their practice, and then they can move into getting into each other's stories. So getting specific, we begin our crisis day number one with two cabinets, which are roughly half science, half diplomatic. I was Kennedy in the US cabinet, and Niv was Khrushchev, right? So in the Soviet cabinet. Also, there was a discrepancy of the experience and the level between the delegates, which also ended up somewhat in the allocation. So it's like the governmental people, at least in the US cabinet, had more experience than the scientists, who some of whom were high schoolers and so on. Niv, can you tell us a bit about the makeup of your cabinet? I think you had the higher level on average.
Well, you know,
You gotta speak loudly, like scream.
most of the time, we really had to try and encourage the delegates to, you know, do stuff beyond their imagination because they were most of them beginners, and it was a little bit hard to actually make progress. And then once we had our favorite character, which was the scientist who actually changed between the cabinets, then actually a lot of things started moving. And it, you know, at the second day, I needed to slow them down because they were running too fast and their imagination was way beyond what we thought it will be. But it's the part of the fun, you know. It was crazy. I mean, I got shot at, I got killed.
Well, let's
and
wait
I-
for that. That's already day
It
3.
was televised.
It was
Yeah,
was
it was
televised.
televised. It was all televised, which was even better because we got to see the reactions of people that were outside the crisis committee, which was even, you know, better to hear because a lot of people got exposed to what we actually got to do there. I think it was super amazing. Yeah.
All right, so let's get to specifics. So day number 1, everybody started to get a feeling of what the crisis was. Initially, you know, it was the day after Kennedy's "We're going to go to the moon" speech, so some space race and travel had already happened, and we had 2 aspects. This is something interesting that I haven't really done the crisis before with the science team. Is we actually gave them in the study guide rocket designs in different parts. So we told them start designing a rocket. So from the backroom perspective, before I get to the front room, and our goal was at the end of day 1, I believe, to have a science fair, right? That was at the end of day 1. Where was it? Where in the world did we place it?
It was in Titograd.
Titograd, exactly. We had one of the secretariat come as Tito and welcome as
Yeah, you were Nasser, and it was fun. We had some guy play Tito, and we had a bunch of different neutral leaders that were not a part of the committee, so it was fun.
And Johnny got to come to take part. It was very very in character. So the goal was to show off that this was our initial story, while we still had some kind of direction, and that's the thing. So like you have we also knew that we could potentially have U.S. elections, or maybe something happening. So we didn't know what it would be, but it was stuff that was potentially out there. So we start the day from a front room perspective, and it was very much encouraging the scientists in the committee to come up with something. So before I get to the front room from, you know, my side of the story, Roi, how do you guys remember the start of the first day and everyone with their directives and ideas?
Yeah, I'll just continue. I'll just start. I feel like the start of the first day was definitely, obviously, as all crises do, it was slower. I think it was a lot due to the fact that this was the first crisis of many delegates, and me and Roy had to go and show them how to use the system itself. We had to go and actually teach them that. So obviously, people are going to be slower at the beginning. It's also kind of really nice to see as the backroom, you sort of see a progress. You see them at the beginning, they write, you know, 1 message an hour, and then by the end of it, we had to limit them like constantly because we were being flooded. It was too fast for us to handle. So we had to close messages and close directives many times. So it's sort of to have this unique opportunity for a crisis where you have delegates that it's their first time. It's nice to see that. So in the first day, it was very calm. For me, at least, I felt like there were a lot of. I felt there were many directives that was actually internal, which was kind of surprising for me. Like there weren't that many. Maybe Roy has a different memory, but I don't remember many technical directives yet. Maybe because it was still discussed. It was mostly internal political stuff. So yeah, the entire progress was very fun to see the delegates getting more confident in their writing and in their directive management. So it was really fun, from very tiring, but really fun from a backward.
Yeah, so just to continue, Roy, because I think he really remembers the specifics a lot better than I do. I just remember like the big problems that we had. And first of all, one of the big problems that we had was that people weren't really already thinking about things that we thought they might have been thinking about. So for instance, at the beginning, we really didn't get anything to do with rocket building or anything of that sort, because scientists, at least in your room, Daniel, they were talking a lot, they were thinking a lot, but it wasn't coming up to action, which means that for us as backroom, it was kind of hard to balance the time frame, because at that time, the Soviets were advancing a lot faster than the Americans. And the second problem we had, which we encountered by the end of the first day when we started getting those first technical directives, well, it was a twofold problem. First of all, you know that the delegates already know what worked and they know what didn't work, which means that all delegates at the beginning start with enough information to technically execute a flight to the moon on their first attempt, which means that we need to invent the science for why it didn't work, which is a problem because that meant that we needed to know this on a really high level of
science, yeah.
Which we don't. I mean, none of us have ever designed anything to go up to the moon, which means it was really difficult. So I think,
one
at
of
least
our
I found myself
participants was supposed to be like as a physicist, so he was supposed to be there. Yeah.
Exactly. So I found myself for at least an hour, I think Roy did too, trying really, really hard to find faults in plans so that it doesn't seem like we're failing them on purpose, but they forgot something and there's something that they still need to achieve. Because I mean, it's not that we wanted to fail them on purpose, it's just it doesn't make sense that the first attempt succeeds and they have too much knowledge. So I think that was kind of the challenge of the first day.
Yeah, definitely. So within that, specifically, as Roy and Roy had to keep coming up for reasons why the Soviet cabinet were far ahead, weren't going to make it. I think it was at the end of day one. What was it, that the braking mechanisms didn't work, so they reached the moon in a crash? Was that day one or was that day two?
Yes. No, it was day one.
That was the end of day one. So, so that's one of the things. Like they were just really like two of the science characters in that committee were really on top of it. And then the American cabinet, the defense arm was pretty competent with like Lyndon Johnson and McNamara, and we had the Secretary of Defense and we had the head of the Secret Services. But the scientists, who were mostly high school participants, took them time to get into it, but they did get some basic ideas together. And this is sort of, to me, the highlight of day one is they had a plan, which I think you all remember, where they designed a faulty rocket with a larger fuel cell with the purpose of the press corps in the room leaking it to the Soviets. But the press corps was like, I like these guys. They were nice to me. They gave me good interviews. I'm not going to share this design. Now, this is really like a cartoon. It's like, you know, like the coyote puts like a sign, food here. So it's like American secret rocket design, the Hamilton one shot, you know, referring to the musical inspiration on one shot. What a clue, you know. They're being drawn out. One of the good things though is there was a lot of original artwork being created for this crisis throughout the days. So the Hamilton one shot is there, and the press isn't taking it. The press corps actually, I even ask like, hey, what's going on? He's like, I see they forgot their paper, but they were nice to me. I'm not gonna do anything with it. I'm like, all right, plan fails. We all go out to lunch. We come back and the paper is gone. We assume somebody threw it out. I think I'll finish the story, and then Niv can tell us how it came up on their end. Because at Titograd, the Soviets are like, we have to present first. Like that's our condition to coming to the science fair. I had no idea. And after Johnny as Nasser and Tito come and welcome us to their super scientific and advanced place, the Soviets come up and start presenting their plan, very, very developed. And they point a picture of their first rocket, and it's the stolen page. And in Model UN, you know that you got it when someone else actually loses their cool and yells at you. So while presenting the Hamilton one as their original rocket plan, one of the delegates, the scientist, what was his name? Mueller, I think. He yells up like, we planned that to be a bomb. It was gonna blow up at you. And I'm like, if they already did it, what? But the Soviets moved all the way through with a really much better presentation. I was like, all right, we're losing the moon race. But the American cabinet came up and they actually gave, I thought, a good enough presentation with rocket parts, the choice of metals and different things that we weren't completely embarrassed. The Soviets were better, but our group represented something. And given that they weren't scientists even for a day yet, they had no background, and some of them English was their second or third language. I thought they pulled through really well, but definitely the random delegate distribution, the two Soviet scientists were far ahead. So that's by our end. Our people were very surprised to see our design made it in the end. Niv, how was that for you when the design popped up in that whole, process there?
Well,
in Khrushchev's room.
so we wanted to do, more than just making a good rocket, a nice rocket. We wanted to bring you down. And we saw the paper at your classroom, and one people just took it, and that we understood that what that we had to do is actually show the people that you are the one who stole our design because we went first. So it was a contest that we made with ourselves to win with the with the who is the maker of the first rocket, and it was hilarious. That was one of the best decisions that my cabinet made throughout the crisis, and we showed you that we are the best. And we did it right.
Was there any debate of should we use the stolen plan?
Oh,
What did Johnny say?
I said that an even better decision was killing you.
Let's get there.
The presentation was very important for us as well, because we wanted to show as as more sleek than you, and we wanted to do it, we wanted to just show the world that we are better than you, period, in every aspect. So it was very important to us, and we said a lot about making that presentation as good as it got. And we were proud. We were very proud.
I think it's very cool in a crisis where you can give PowerPoints to show scientific discoveries, and that I think goes to show that having the science, the political class with different abilities really comes into play. Any final comments before we go to day two?
I just think that regarding what Roi said earlier about not having a story, not having a plan, and just giving the delegates to do whatever they want. I think if I had to remember one thing from the conference, it would be, I think the height of the conference was the science fair, which was a thing we planned ahead. So it's a delicate balance. I think you have to plan some events and some points you want to go by, but the way you get there is totally up to the delegates. But the matter of fact is that the heights of the conference to me were things we planned. They got context from the delegates, but the assassination of Kharchov and the science fair and the actual landing on the moon, which we'll get to later, were things mostly crafted by the back room and us, but of course the delegates do everything else. They give things, we are in charge of writing the heights, but they get there, they earn it, the science fair was essentially a combination of everything the delegates did. That's what made it special. So it's a balance you must walk.
Yeah, it was great that we had a deadline to go up to, because it made us do everything much faster, and we had to really use our imagination of how we can beat the other cabinet, because maybe it's not the last day and we're not actually fighting each other, but even at the little parts of the crisis, our main goal is to be better, to be the better cabinet. So it was super important event, and it went really good.
Yeah, so I think, and I want to touch on Roy's point, I think what backroom usually ends up doing, and I think that's the most important function the backroom plays, is to articulate the goals the delegates want to reach as a cabinet and put it out there as a real thing that happens. But that doesn't mean that these goals are prefixed, but they are shaped by the delegates, and then backroom can say, okay, so this is what we're going to do. And then the delegates are like, yeah, that's exactly what we want happening. So for instance, in the first day, we also had a different idea for the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I think the idea for the Cuban Missile Crisis was because we all knew that they were going to be developing weapons. And we said, not weapons, rockets, excuse me, but these rockets could be used as weapons. And if one of the scientists or one of the politicians were to go at that angle, then we said, okay, so we know where we could take that if that were to happen. But once that didn't happen, and we waited for it to happen maybe during day 2 or whatever, but we understood where day 1 was going. We understood they want to do science stuff to get to the moon. And we said, okay, let's articulate this goal by implementing a science fair. And I think that's exactly what happened. So it's not like it was prefixed, like I'm just articulating Roy's idea. It wasn't prefixed in the way that we knew we wanted that to happen, but no, we said, if it goes in this direction, we think this would make it go better, and it did.
Definitely. I feel with the stories, actually most of them are ones that we didn't plan for, like I guess day 2 Security Council meeting, for example. So the science fair, I think, is the only thing that was really locked in the story, only because it was early enough, and I don't feel there was any real, like, unless someone was going to get shot there wasn't really that big of a serious consequence to the action. It was just there for fun and as a warm-up.
They tried to shoot it, just it didn't.
Yeah, we're like, no one's dying today. That's true. You can yell at each other, you can reveal your plans, you can get emotional. No, nobody dies. And I think for later on, though, we actually constructed like some things didn't happen, like a US election campaign, that didn't happen. Were we so locked that would have happened, I think would have damaged the story. It didn't become relevant. So, and the opposite, the trial at the end, we never planned that, and that was awesome. But what a wake up moment for, like, hey, let's get back to, so day two we start, and this is the day where there's in the US cabinet, sorry, by us, we're having the creative idea of sending a cow into space. That was like the U.S. plan of like, all right, the Russians are almost the moon. We're gonna put we're gonna get a new first. A cow. What was the cow's name? Do you guys remember?
Booba the cow.
Booba the cow is gonna go into space. So well, that's the U.S. at the pinnacle of their scientific thought. When the Russians get to some infighting, Niv, can you tell us about the process of getting rid of a scientist?
Well, it was, for us, I think it was the main argument between our scientists, because they weren't all agreed on sending a cow to the moon. But after a lot of discussion, we decided that this is a great thing to do, so we can be the best at something, you know. It was a part of that, and yeah, we just wanted to do something. Yeah.
As you do. I feel like which I think happens most of the time, while the Soviet cabinet was playing the game per se, their scientists were more motivated, and they did plans that were essentially better for the space race. The US came up with more out of the box ideas. They started fires in Ukraine. They funded pirates with one Johnny Depp in charge of the pirates in the Caribbean near Cuba. So the US was throwing many wacky ideas out there, which the backroom sometimes allowed, sometimes we told them, no, that's dumb. Here are 10 reasons why this shouldn't work. But yeah, it was interesting to see that. I think in day 2 we saw the difference between the cabinets, how they played the game, and I think that's fine. That's not a situation you want to prevent. Like that's a place where you want to give the delegates the option to play however they want. You know, Crisis is a game, sort of, more than any other committee. I feel like it's a sort of a game, and I like that aspect.
It's funny how I always end up talking after you. As usual, you bring up a lot of great points. I think from backroom perspective, our main problem that we had to deal with at the beginning of day 2 was just how far advanced the Soviets were in the moon race as opposed to the Americans. And I'm going to give some context to things that were already said here. For us, we said that because the Soviets were just all in on that idea, and they had a great leading scientist. I forget the name of the character, but he was great, and he wrote very, very detailed directives. So what we had to do was to find a way to slow it down, and we went on the political avenue, which meant we wanted them to make a decision. If you're committing all of those resources and all of those transportation resources specifically that rely on gasoline and on oil to your space race, that means that you're not going to be able to transport food to Ukraine. And we chose Ukraine specifically because some of the leading delegates were from Ukraine. Now this is a completely different, I mean, in this political climate, it's probably a little bit different, but back then just, Semichesny, which was the KGB chief. So the character is originally from Ukraine, and we wanted to see what's going to happen. So we led the Soviets on kind of a side plot for the entirety of the first half of the second day, so that they wouldn't be able to continue just that unbelievable advantage that they had over the Americans in the space race, allowing the Americans time to react by sending a cow up to space, and achieving victory in sending something up to space, and B, also react on the political level, which I think led to what we didn't expect, which was that the US not only said, you must help Ukraine, which is what we thought they were going to do to stall the space program. No, the US started fires in Ukraine to burn all of the crops that are already there, because Ukraine is kind of a wheat basket anyway, and then said, look at what's going on. This is a real catastrophe. We want to bring aid to Ukraine to make the Soviets seem weak, which to us was both, I don't know, claiming victory, like a sort of political victory, but also kind of ruining our plan, because if you bring aid to Ukraine, the Soviets can continue to build their rockets, unabated. So the Soviet room, I think, one of the more important times is that 1 hour in which some delegates realized that it might be great to invite the US into Ukraine, and some delegates said, I think it's going to be a bad idea. And in that time frame, I think Semichasny, which ended up being the best delegate, started saying, I don't like the way this committee is being run. I think we should kill, or I think my agents should kill Khrushchev. And I think it was at that point in time that our crisis really took one of the biggest steps, both in terms of the UN Security Council and in terms of what happened later with Khrushchev. So it's a real formative day.
I think it's very cool to see how these like storylines can exist in parallel, because while that was happening in the science realm in the Soviets, there was a decision to get rid of Smirnov, right? So they're like his ideas are out there. Niv could say it better than myself, but from the US side, we had agents ready that if someone tried, like to know if someone's going to try to kill any of the scientists and to fake their death and sneak them out. We were just waiting for whatever that would happen, and that was in place. So on the Soviet side, to kill him, we just ferried him over. And this is the beauty of having characters who aren't kidnapped heads of state, because even if, let's say, Khrushchev himself was captured, would he work with the Americans? But when you tell a Russian scientist, by the way, I think they did kill his family, but even if they wouldn't have, maybe we could have made it up. But he shows up in our room as his character, one of the two leading Soviet designers who knows exactly what they did, and what they did just to show the difference. The Soviets had 100 satellites in space at this point. Like they were there was one space cow, and the Soviets are circling the world. They have half of a nuclear powered station on the moon. And then one of the two key engineers, yeah, see, Roy's remembering something, ends up in the US cabinet and goes, all right, Russia tried to kill me. We're going to war. And then draws on a map the entire Russian plan. The Russians don't know that he's in the other room. He was very generous. He's like, we have 100 satellites and cow. That is also cow. Making the Americans feel better. And then worked with our team to pull the plan to overcome this with American forces and American operations. Roi Nachlieli, you had something to say.
Yeah, so regarding the atomic kind of rocket that was launched into space, so they wanted the Soviets at the end of day 2, I think, which is a bit of a jump, but they wanted at the end of the day to put a nuclear powered sort of space station up there. I think it was all part of Smirnov's plan, but we said, are you sure you guys want the first time for anyone to check a nuclear engine to be something that's sent into space? And they kind of wanted to go with it. So it ended up blasting, which means that they had a Chernobyl effect somewhere. But then the Soviet cabinet said, well, we don't care. It was somewhere in Uzbekistan. No one cares what happens in Uzbekistan. So they kind of didn't care about it. And so we sent it over to the Americans. And I think it was just completely glossed over because the Americans were so stuck in the space race, which means one of the bigger catastrophes that happened in the crisis went completely unnoticed. And the Soviets said, okay, so it failed again. We'll launch it again in Uzbekistan. They found another remote location to build a different place, which of course worsened the situation in Ukraine, but they didn't really care at that point. And they just continued launching it until at the end of the day, we had to say, fine, yeah, well, you made the changes necessary, and they managed to get it up into space, which I think is the big prelude to day 3 and everything that happened with Smirnov.
All right, so we're moving on, and Khrushchev also died day 3, right?
No, that was day 2.
No, day 2.
Day 2,
Yeah,
right?
so the political story.
So can you talk a bit about how that was engineered, how that went down, and specifically the thought process that we had to decide if we're going to reboot, because when a crisis chair dies, there are two ways to go about it. One of them is a lead delegate takes over, or you let the delegates fight it out for themselves. And the second one is that you reboot the chair as a new character. Like the chair physically, the human being is staying in the room to continue watching because someone needs to see what's going on. But how active and where their role is can really depend on a bunch of factors. So Roi Nachlieli, talk about a little bit about the process that we took when we were deciding what to do after it was decided that, you know, Stephen Chastney was going to succeed in killing Khrushchev.
Okay, so first of all, whenever a delegate wants to kill even another delegate, there are two things that Backroom takes into consideration. First is just how it's going to affect the story. And second is how well the plan was thought out. So Chastney laid down a very detailed plan starting at the end of day one, but mostly on day two, how to kill Khrushchev, what to do. It was very detailed. It seemed like the motives were there. And we said, okay, we think we can handle it. We think it'll be a great spin on the story. Instead of Kennedy being assassinated, Khrushchev being assassinated because he was incompetent, and all of the things that happened also in Ukraine and in the failure of using and utilizing the Russian advantage in the space race. So we thought it could be interesting. And then came lunchtime after everything we did with the Security Council. And it seemed like a part of Chastney's plan just wasn't there, which is what she, or, you know, the character was male. So what he planned to do afterwards. And that was kind of odd. So after lunch, the killing was executed, and there was absolutely nothing planned for succession. So the Soviets were there, and we said, we'll give them like 20 minutes just to see if they go someplace. And they started doing votes. We think this guy should lead. We think this guy should lead. And it was so unbelievably un-Soviet and way too democratic that we just, I remember this, we pulled Niv aside and we said, okay, you're going to go in there. We're going to be your bodyguards. You're going to be Brezhnev, which was not a character, but, you know, was second in command to Khrushchev. You're going to go in there and you're going to assume power. And so right when they're about to take this democratic vote to who should lead and who should listen to who, or maybe lead the cabinet altogether, we burst in, we open the doors, Roy and myself, we walk in there like soldiers with Niv, and she bangs on the table, lets everyone know she's in command. And just like that, order was restored. But it wasn't that we planned this in the beginning. We really thought that there's a power vacuum, and for us, whoever grabs power, and we thought Chastney was going to do it because she's the one who killed Khrushchev, that would be like taking first place, taking command of the committee. But probably because of inexperience, that ended up not happening, and we had to deal with the situation on the fly. And I think it was really a good thing to do, because I don't even know what would have happened to the committee had we not had Niv rule it with an iron fist.
So,
Yeah, and another interesting aspect of that I think we should mention, what we did do, the very, very minor detail of planning we did, I think we planned it, I remember, a very short time before we entered the room. After Niv's chair got assassinated, we saw them bickering, and we figured, okay, how can we establish this the control of Brezhnev now? Because they can say, no, we find this unacceptable and yada yada, even though that's not how it works in the USSR, but we figured the delegates are going to do that. So we brought in another guy from the back room, which was not a character. We just let him sit there with no explanation. He was like an advisor, a very generic advisor. And he was like, no, I object, Brezhnev is not the leader. So me and Ray just took him out, played a gunshot sound on our telephone, and killed him essentially off screen. And that then essentially the delegates got the message that if you object to Brezhnev, you're gonna die. And that's how we established the reboot of Niv. Another funny aspect is that they were the first thing that was discussed. We must find out who did this, you know. and we were, if they were going to do a good job, we were going to let them to know who did this. But they didn't even, they're like, okay, we should conduct an investigation, and then Niv did that as she went into the chair. We should like investigate. That never happened because they didn't do it well enough. They got a false accusation, but they didn't even like consider asking where the gunman is. We had someone playing the gunman. They didn't even think about asking where the gunman went. So the delegates, we thought they would. We thought that's a possibility, but sometimes the delegates, they don't think of things the back room do, or they overthink things the back room doesn't, and that's how the story progresses. So that was fun to see.
And one thing that went to Semichesny's favor at the end of the day was that she said, yeah, I'll have my agents look into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it actually shook a lot of things up. The delegates were fighting a lot that day. They were really against each other. They were trying to figure out who was the one who assassinated me. And it was very refreshing because till that point we were very busy with being the best cabinet. And then from that point, they started to act as individuals and not as a cabinet, because they understood that they had someone that, wasn't really a part. So it was very interesting.
Yeah, the height of that was when they held a vote on who was the supposed man behind it, and they voted, and they killed or jailed someone who didn't even do it. It was a very well played act by the delegate to assassinate.
Kosygin, right?
Yeah, I think so. He was one of the I think their scientists, I believe.
Yes.
And he was just very, he had plans, but he went against a lot of people during the conference, and it cost him because they all turned against him. It was very easy for them to believe he did it, even though he didn't. And I think they just wanted him out either way, so it was very easy to pin that on him. So it was a nice tool. The whole assassination was a great idea because it did two things. It slowed the Soviets down tremendously, and it allowed to shake up the dynamic in the Soviet cabinet in ways that were beneficial to smart candidates and essentially damning to bad candidates, people who played the game worse, essentially.
All right, so moving forward, because we have I think like 12 minutes to wrap up this whole story. So we reached the point that that there was the understanding. It was funny with the delegates where it's like, okay, the leader is killed. Let's democratically decide what to do. It's like it happens, I think, in crises a lot, unless it's like a feudal society. They think, oh, you kill someone, and then what? Their son will take over, or the second in command. But that's not necessarily how things work. So we had Brezhnev running the cabinet. In the meantime, in the space race, the US, now that they know all the Soviet plans, build a very elaborate system of space commandos to take over all of the satellites, finish the moon base, and send Dr. Smirnov up with complete control of the communications, which the US all sign off on. Now, I think we all saw the writing on the wall, but far be it for me as the chair to do anything. Also, it was interesting for the world to see, Khrushchev get shot on TV in the 1960s, and Kennedy was invited by a Russian initiative to take part in a public parade, and I was like, no, like a war leader just got shot. I'm not going to Dallas. This makes no sense. And that's the thing. Like, in movies, sometimes people will make stupid decisions, so the movie can happen. But in real life, if one of the two most powerful leaders gets shot on live television, the other one will probably not be seen in public for a while. That's something we can actually have people acting like people a lot of the time. So we get to day 3 for the US. After the Khrushchev getting shot, Kennedy gets on TV with a secret bunker and shows the new US space plan, which now involves a much better presentation. Where did we reveal that we took over the whole space operation there, or was that I'm trying
That
to
was a secret, I think.
No, because remember that I think it was the end of the broadcast that Smirnov comes from space and says, I think it was there. So I think the US first, we presented our space program very conveniently showing how it basically took over the entire operation. And we're like, and how did this happen? Well, I guess we was very lucky. And then Smirnov, this was supposed to be his final day in the conference. So we're like, all right, we'll let him go out with a bang. He takes over the broadcast and says, I actually took control of everything. He had the American Marines who were taking over the Soviet base or whatever, that they were all on a communication system that we couldn't reach through to, which the American scientists signed off on. Like the American cabinet signed off on all of this. And he goes, says, all right, I've taken over all of space. I can rain satellites down on Earth. I'm declaring a kingdom on the moon, and tough luck for you. And then I think, was it day 3 that he like also landed a satellite on like a Soviet city, right? Or Chinese city?
He lands on the moon the day before the last, and then in the last day, Smirnov lands on the moon alone, betrays the Americans. And then in the last day, both cabinets work together because he betrayed both of them to bring down Smirnov. And do you want me to just tell what happened?
Wait, one sec. We're almost gonna get there. So the day 3 ends with this independent moon base with Brezhnev and the Soviet cabinet, who have now probably purged like half their number between Smirnov being like shuttled away and Kosygin getting killed and replaced. And I think we had like 1 or 2 delegates moving sides. We forgot about the family kidnapping of von Braun. Oh my God, how did we forget that? Roi, I think Nachlieli, tell us about that whole story. We can't have our crisis without the motivation.
You think I remember the details? I think Roi remembers details a lot better than I do.
There was, I believe it was just the Soviets for threatening the American scientist, the German turned American scientist von Braun, and the Americans foresaw it, and they put guards on von Braun himself, and the Soviets say, well, okay, what about his family? We want to kidnap his family. So we start this whole mini plot where they try to kidnap them, and it's like a heist thing. They try to do it. The Americans respond by countermeasures. They leave a note in his home telling him, kidnapped your family. They're not really kidnapped. It's the whole deal. I think in the end of the day, the Soviets get them to the sea, and the Americans just sink the boat. The family dies at sea. Von Braun is heartbroken. He has motivation. So it ended like in a gray area where both sides didn't really get what they wanted. So it was a fun story. It was one of like tens of mini stories we had. It was very fun.
It's true. I completely forgot about that. Wow, that was such an intense story, because what ended up happening is that there were 3 KGB officers who were sleeper spies, and they kidnapped von Braun's family. And then they called up from a safe house. They called up von Braun to tell him that they were kidnapped, so that the Americans, I don't remember what they had to give back in return. Then the Americans understood that it was coming from someplace. They knew where the line was. And then the KGB agents had to run away, because now the Soviets were at an issue, because you could find the 3 responsible for it and interrogate them about what they know. So the Americans cut off all airports, everything, but they proceeded by truck, I think, to the Gulf of Mexico. I think they lived in New York or something like that. They managed to get to the Gulf of Mexico, and they wanted to run to Cuba, but the Americans knew about that. They figured it out somehow. And so an American vessel, like a military vessel, stopped them. And once they boarded, the KGB agents killed themselves so that they wouldn't be taken captives and they wouldn't give information. And they also killed von Braun's family. So that's how it ended. But there was a time there for like almost an hour where the Soviets didn't know if KGB officers were going to be taken hostage. They were pretty high ranking. They knew a whole bunch of stuff. And the Americans didn't know what to do, what they had to give in return for von Braun's family. Do they care about von Braun's family? Suddenly von Braun becomes a political figure because von Braun starts saying, I want my family to be released. I don't care what the price is. So it was very interesting, and it ended with nothing for both sides, and kind of wasted time and heartbreak for both of them.
I remember the delegates screaming at the Soviets.
You have to scream, Roy. We can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I remember the delegates actually, von Braun, screaming at like one of the, when both cabinets came together, he screamed at one of the Soviets, you killed my family, you bastards. I mean, he was very into it, so it was very funny.
Another moment.
Yeah.
It's sort of one of the differences I feel with doing different age MUN participants, because we wrote a letter that von Braun got, it's like your family was kidnapped. So she gets up and says, hey, everyone, my parents were kidnapped. It was very, very cute. And then, yeah, it's like, but it really became one of those, like, that's what she said moments where like the Soviet cabinet kept building it into the script. It's like, all right, and we have right now this new hyperfuel engine that can really burn fuel, burn like your family, von Braun. You know, it was like, I'll get you. So you guys remember that happened a few times. I see that.
Daniel, it seems that we have to go.
All right, so I guess that's our cue. Maybe you guys can like turn yourselves off, turn your screen off, and then relocate. Or I guess that can
we can carry on like this. It's fine.
Okay. All right. So after that, we reached the final day, which was as described. The cabinets come together. There's like a joint war council. They come up with a plan, which the backroom approves, eventually to deploy a super space force and bring down Smirnov, which is successfully done. He manages to parachute down to Earth, where he gets arrested. Pretty, I guess, convenient to not blow up on the moon. Also, the delegate actually was there, but given that we gave him a moon base, we're like, we're not going to have 3 cabinets. So you're just going to exist in a corner. We'll have this plan work, and if it works or not, like this is a backroom sort of play to have. But when he landed back on Earth, it was the question of what do you do with, like, it was like Nanking in China that he like landed a satellite on, right? Like,
yeah, one of the Chinese cities.
so this was like the biggest like loss of life by an individual who wasn't a world leader in the history of the world. And then for the crisis, we decided we're going to end it with a trial, also a very spontaneous decision of what to do. So after each of the cabinet's stories finish off with, Kennedy alive, the US cabinet pretty united, the Soviet cabinet, very few of the original people still there, but also getting together. And then we have our Hague trial. Roy, when you tell us about the trial.
Yeah, so the trial was done in sort of an ICC format. So you have the judge, and then you have people that are sitting there, like the judge presiding, which can't really vote. And then you have every member of each committee sitting there, including the chairs, and they can vote either to convict or not to convict. Now, the problem was that it was such a sure conviction that it seemed like a too good of an ending. So first, we said we want people to speak and defend him, and then a delegate did defend him, but he defended killing him, as in he said no, just throw him in prison for his entire life. And then the debate kind of centered on whether we should kill him or put him in jail. But it didn't seem interesting enough, so I think on a whim at least, I said, well, you know what, as judge presiding, I think it's not okay that we throw all the blame on him. At the end of the day, he was aided by Khrushchev or Brezhnev when it was in their interest, and then was aided by Kennedy when it was in their interest. So they're on trial with him too. So if you convict all 3, and if you acquit all 3. What punishment do you choose for all 3 of them?
What a move.
Yeah, and then the cabinets go, well, there was a moment there of hesitation, and Daniel goes, what? No one's gonna convict them. I mean, no American is gonna convict Kennedy. And they go, oh yeah, well, that's true. And at the end of the day, they didn't convict any of them, and he just walked free. And that's how the crisis ended.
We had guards taking Niv and myself to the front, like putting us on trial. And I think there were 2 delegates in the Soviet cabinet who see like the look cross their mind. But like, there's also the question of like, okay, like we happen to have both walked into the Hague, and maybe we're both physically there. But there's definitely something that would like, you wouldn't get off lightly. And this really, it's a horrible precedent, for world leaders. Like maybe it would bring more accountability. But it was an unexpected move. I didn't know. I don't think that like I knew this was going to happen. But like when Roi decided, like listen, this is exactly, we put these like little people on trial, but like this scientist, not even the leading Soviet scientist, like this only would have happened with the money that only like a superpower could provide. And we definitely like, we would have been fine if it was our people, but when this rogue agent starts raining satellites on Earth, who gave him those satellites? And that was really an incredible ending, which sort of leaves you with a view of just like how real life can work. Then in the end, it's like Smirnov to be the victim, fine. But if you really want our perpetrator to account, I think it was maybe 2, was it 2 who voted to convict, or was it 0? I don't remember.
There was, I think there was 1 American and one Soviet actually, which later affected, of course, you tell the characters the ending, and of course the delegate voted in favor of executing Khrushchev. Later found himself, Brezhnev found himself, of course, dead in the end. No surprise. So yeah, about the trial, I think when you do a crisis, if you do a fantasy, you have to follow logic of the world you set up. But when you do historical crisis, you have a very delicate balance of immersion and what could have happened versus the story you're creating and the world. And when you get to the final day, you're more immersed in the story than what could have happened, because the delegates made their own things happen, and you're very far off from real history. And I think it was a great move, even though, in real history, this could have never happened. You would never have a trial that has no logic in law or diplomacy or nothing. You would have never had a trial with 3 accused who are just there, and the vote, it's a democratic vote whether they die or not. That's not how you do law or international law. But it was fun for the story, and it was, I've experienced crises where it just ends. There's a big event where they tell you, okay, this happened, this is how it ends, and everybody clap. But this was, you let the delegates do something. It was a defining moment. At the start, I thought we might actually see them all vote. It was up to them how the story ends. So it was a good decision. And it was very fun. And I think in those cases, you should deviate from history, and you should give the delegates, you should value the fun and immersion aspect over staying true to history.
It was the
Closure.
And it was great for the entire conference, for everyone watching and engaging. And it was fun, that moment when the borders between the committees weren't set in stone, and it was very nice. And people who weren't part of crisis had the experience of seeing some of it.
Yeah, we had Matan, who kept coming back as the representative of China, I think.
Yeah.
And he did a very good job because he kept on top of the story. So every time he came in, like 3 different times, he was always able to continue the conversation. I think that's the highest level for a non-playable character NPC, that they actually know what's going on in the story. It's like they were there, even though they have many other conference responsibilities. And we did have like different secretariat members coming and be different staff. And it was really, really fun. The support, so important. That we were able to really just focus on the crisis and do our thing. And if we need an extra classroom, they got it. And if we needed a sound system or a projector, they got it. And it was really great. So to sort of wrap up with final thoughts, so for those watching all this through, this for us is a return to the moon. This is a crisis that really completely filled our days for the 4 days that we were doing it. Very intense, like it's like morning to night, snap, beginning to end, snap. You're like, wow. It was, and to me, it was one of my favorite crises ever. And to come after not having in-person MUN for over a year, to come and try this, especially when you're short-staffed and short-delegated, and to come up with a story that like could easily fill more than a movie with incredibly rich characters, and you see the decisions being made. And I think one of the great parts of Crisis, you get people to put themselves in the seat and go, what would we do in this reality? It's like, I want to be like this other scientist smart, but I want to get his job, and then there's consequences. I mean, like the Soviet cabinet had their entire space program stolen, and the US did too. So it's very much about consequences and crisis. And this story really was, the delegates had so many interesting ideas that populated. We were just like more like giving order and a direction to things. But so much of it, like we couldn't have imagined where it started. I think the reason it was so fulfilling and such an awesome story to tell, and for those watching, you're seeing us relive it. It's not an MUN that we're going to forget anytime soon. And I think to kick off in-person conferences again, and there's going to be a really awesome crisis this year run by Roi and Niv, which is going to be which I'd highly recommend. And hopefully the rest of us will be there to say hello. So anyone, any final words or thoughts from this nostalgic return to the moon that we've had?
Well, I just have to say that it was a great experience for me, especially as the first time I've been a chair in a committee.
You even got to a rap battle.
Yeah, it was very surprising. One day before we started the committee, you just, no, Niv, you're a chair now. Yeah, okay, yeah, sure, fine. But it went better than I thought it could ever be, and I was super satisfied by it. Yeah.
For me, it was the very first crisis, and it was incredible. From what I know today, to those watching, when you are participating in a crisis or where you build a crisis, it's essentially a delicate balance. As you said, the backroom sets the tone. They are the objective truth. What the backroom says is what happens. But you want to, as you organize the crisis committee, you want to set the rules. You want to say, okay, this thing won't go. For example, we don't want to kill like 5 characters. But that's about it, right? The crisis is the delegates more than any other committee. This is a delegates committee, and the delegates are essentially what make or break a good crisis. So it's fun in that regard that almost anyone who's in the crisis, whether it is the chair or the delegates or the backroom, has a lot of control over what happens and where the story goes. So it feels like a connected story, and that's what I think we all felt in our crisis. That felt very well. That's the most fun for me in crisis. The fact you create a story with a bunch of people you first meet, and in 4 days you create one of the best stories you ever had the pleasure of participating in. So yeah.
Well, for me, I would say that
You have to speak louder into the mic.
Yeah, okay. I would say that this crisis, which was created under impossible circumstances, like the Delta variant, everything that was going on, the staff and everything, and it went on so amazing that it made me feel really secure about the possibilities of managing crisis, creating crisis committees in short times. And now I'm sure that the crisis that you'll do this year will be completely amazing because it's so much easier now. And without experience, it was so like, or a lot of experience, it was so impressive, and it gave so many people in this conference this feeling that it wasn't just like another committee, it was something really special, despite everything, and perhaps because of everything.
So for me, I mean, I don't know if you guys know this, but I mean, I joined because Daniel said, hey, we're trying to do something and it's going to be great. And it's going to be with a lot of international students. And I knew a bunch of them from Hamun and, or like from the conferences where I did, because most of them weren't from Hamun specifically. And then it all kind of fell down and the logistics. And then we tried our day of, let's see how it works. Let's do the simulation. And it went terrible. And I told Daniel, I'm not coming. Like, count me out. And I think I still have that conversation on WhatsApp because Daniel said, you can't not come. I mean, all the international people aren't coming. I need to have a staff. You said you're going to do this. So I said, okay, I'll come for the obligation. I really didn't expect to enjoy any part of it. And we come, and I remember on the first day I'm sitting there and it's new people. And I'm like, I really don't want to get to know new people. And we're only 4 and 2 of us have to be chairs. So backroom's only going to be run by 2 people, which makes no sense under like any backroom building guide. You need to have like around like 1 per 3, maybe 1 per 5 delegates, but we really were missing people. And I did not expect to have such a good time. Like I expected by the end of the first day, I might not return. I don't even know. And I did, and I had a really good time. So it was unexpected, and I think it just goes to show that in MUN you meet the best people, even if you're not expecting to, and you come for the idea or maybe for the obligation in this case, and you stay for the people. And it works not only for delegates, but for staff as well.
Well, I'm definitely glad you decided to come for more than one day. Roy and I have known each other for a long time and done a whole bunch of different MUNing together, and especially like when I thought like, oh, it's going to be, here we're gonna, have it like as far as like local team for Crisis, there was no question. Definitely were some bumps with like the hybrid Afghanistan scenario, which was very prophetic, but not a smashing success as far as a localized and long distance staff. But yeah, to echo what everyone said, the crisis just like turned into something so incredible and so exciting. Like, we see the smiles on our faces remembering it. And I've been to enough crises that were not that great. The stories did not tie up. The people, you really watch the growth of the participants. Like everyone got better. Everyone got a better understanding. Everyone could now go into another one and be like, three levels higher, and just how the plot worked out and the decisions to make. And like from our staffing perspective, both in the front room where we had to sort of navigate the discussions forward, keeping giving people responsibilities in the back room, keeping having the pressure up and having all these different events in the world go on. And on the one hand, like keep motivating the characters who aren't doing something, whose portfolios aren't under pressure, as opposed to just moving with the delegate plot, because there was the space plot and then there was a succession story and all these things happening at the same time, like in real life. Like we have many different things to deal with at the same time, which was really, I'd say, like awe-inspiring to see how all the different pieces came together. And I can say that for our team, we didn't know until not long before that it would just be us. I remember in the beginning, we were thinking about like participants from this place and that place, and I was part of the Game of Thrones MUN team, and maybe they were going to come join. But I told Johnny, like, we need someone from the society. So he said, okay, this is Roi Weisman. He's going to, join you for this. When we saw, like, as you all joined for the different meetings, the shape of the team changed, who they were. We had a bunch of staffing changes, and then suddenly, boom. But it shows that with a dedicated team of 4, and supporting secretariat and some awesome participants, you can have one of the funnest crisis experiences that you can. And I'm really glad that we were invited by World MUN Day to give a crisis talk and that we could come and revisit this. And that's it from my end. Happy to hang and do everything with this team anytime. So that's it for us. Really great to see you all. And yeah, happy World MUN Day and hopefully many more good conferences ahead.
See you. All right.
Great to see you.
Great to see you.